12 years of silence, 12 years of building a life without them. Then my phone rang at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I saw a name I thought I'd never see again. Mom. My hands trembled as I answered. Maya speaking? Maya, honey. Her voice cracked. It's Dad. He's dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors say maybe 3 months. For a moment, the world stopped. Despite everything, despite the 12 years of radio silence, he was still my father. I'm so sorry, Mum. I had no idea. We need to talk, sweetheart, as a family. Can you come home? Home. I hadn't called that place home in over a decade, but when someone's dying, you put aside the past, right? I'll be there tomorrow. Thank you, Maya, and bring your checkbook. That last sentence should have been my warning, but grief has a way of making you hope for reconciliation when all they really want is your bank account. Hi everyone, I'm Maya. I'm 32, and I've spent the last 12 years learning that sometimes the family you choose is more valuable than the one you're born into. If you've ever felt like the forgotten child, the one who gives everything and gets nothing back, please subscribe. I promise this story will show you that sometimes walking away isn't cruel. It's survival. And trust me, you'll want to stick around until the end, because what happened next changed everything. Let me take you back to where it all began, because you need to understand why 12 years ago I made the hardest decision of my life. I was 8 years old the first time I realized I wasn't the favorite. It was my birthday, September 15th, and I woke up excited, expecting the usual birthday breakfast in bed that my little sister Sarah always got. Instead, I found Mom in the kitchen making regular cereal. Mom, it's my birthday, I said, tugging on her robe. She looked at me blankly for a moment. Oh, honey, I'm sorry. Sarah has her dance recital tonight, and I've been so focused on getting her costume ready. My birthday dinner was take-out pizza because Mum was too tired from Sarah's recital. My birthday cake was store-bought because there wasn't time to make one. Sarah got the biggest slice because she worked so hard at her performance. That was my 8th birthday, the first of many disappointments. When I turned 16, I planned my own surprise party. I saved up my babysitting money, bought decorations, invited friends. The day arrived and I was so excited until I came home to find the living room decorated for Sarah's 13th birthday party instead. But Mom, I protested, today is my birthday. I know, sweetie, but Sarah's friends were available today and you know how important her social life is. We can celebrate yours next weekend. Next weekend never came. There was always something more important, someone else's needs that took priority. Sarah's dance competitions, Sarah's school projects, Sarah's friend drama. Maya could wait. Maya would understand. Maya was the responsible one. The pattern continued through high school. When I graduated valedictorian, Mum and Dad missed the ceremony because Sarah had a stomach bug and needed someone to stay home with her. She was 15, old enough to take care of herself, but somehow that didn't matter. I earned a full scholarship to study architecture at Northwestern University. The day the acceptance letter came, I ran into the house, practically vibrating with excitement. Mom, Dad, I got into Northwestern, full scholarship. Dad looked up from his newspaper. That's nice, honey. Sarah, did you finish your homework? My moment of triumph lasted exactly 30 seconds before the conversation shifted to Sarah's C+ in biology and how we needed to find her a tutor. College was my escape. For 4 years, I lived in a world where my achievements mattered, where people noticed my hard work. I thrived. I made Dean's List every semester, interned at prestigious firms, built relationships with professors who actually saw my potential. But even from 300 miles away, the dysfunction followed me. Every phone call home was about Sarah. Sarah was struggling in high school. Sarah needed money for this or that. Sarah was thinking about college but wasn't sure what she wanted to study. "Maybe you could talk to her," Mum would say. "You're so good at figuring things out." I became Sarah's unofficial college counsellor, scholarship researcher and life coach, all from my dorm room while managing my own demanding course load. When she finally got into a local community college with mediocre grades, you'd have thought she'd cured cancer from the way Mom and Dad celebrated. The real breaking point came during my junior year. I had landed an incredible summer internship with a top architectural firm in Chicago, unpaid, but the experience was invaluable. I was sleeping on a friend's couch and living on ramen noodles, but I was building my future. That's when Mom called with exciting news. "Maya, honey, we found the perfect house. It's in the suburbs, has a pool, and Sarah's high school is in one of the best districts in the state." "That's great, Mom. Are you and Dad finally ready to move out of the old place?" "Well, that's the thing. The down payment is a bit more than we expected. We were hoping, you're so successful with that internship and everything." My stomach dropped. "How much are we talking about?" $80,000, but think of it as an investment. Once Sarah graduates and gets settled, we'll put the house in your name. It'll be like buying your first property. $80,000. My entire college fund, my emergency savings, everything I had worked for. But it was for family, right? And they promised to put it in my name eventually. I was 20 years old and naive enough to believe that family meant something. I liquidated everything. Every penny I had saved from jobs since I was 14, every birthday gift from grandparents, every scholarship refund. I co-signed the mortgage because my parents' credit wasn't good enough. I put my name on that loan, trusting that they'd keep their word. The house was beautiful. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a pool, and a 3-car garage in a neighborhood where houses started at $500,000. Sarah got the master suite because she needed space to grow. I got a text message thanking me for helping out the family. I didn't even get to see the house until Thanksgiving break. 2 years later, I graduated summa cum laude and landed my dream job at a prestigious firm in downtown Chicago. I was making good money, enough to start paying back my student loans and rebuild my savings. That's when I decided to check on the house paperwork, thinking it might be time to officially transfer the deed to my name like they'd promised. I'll never forget that phone call with the mortgage company. "I'm calling about the property on Maple Street," I told the representative. "I'm listed as the co-signer, but I wanted to check on transferring the deed." "Let me pull that up for you. Maya Chen, correct? I see you're the co-signer on the loan, but the deed is listed under Sarah Chen." My blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry, what?" "The deed shows Sarah Chen as the primary owner. You're listed as the co-signer for the mortgage, which means you're responsible for the payments, but you're not listed as an owner of the property." They had done it. My own parents had taken my money, used my credit, and given the house to Sarah. When I called Mom, shaking with rage and betrayal, her response shattered what was left of my heart. "Maya, honey, you're overreacting. Sarah is our baby, and she needs security. You're strong and independent. You'll be fine. Besides, it's not like we're asking you to keep paying for it." Except they were asking me to keep paying for it. The mortgage was in my name. If payments stopped, my credit would be destroyed. "You used me," I whispered into the phone. "We didn't use you. We trusted you. Sarah is the future of this family. She needs stability while she figures out her path. You've always been the problem solver, the one who makes things work. This is just you helping your sister." "And what about me? What about my future?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Mum's voice came back, cold and matter-of-fact. "Maya, you've always been fine on your own. You don't need us the way Sarah does. She's more delicate. You're the strong one. You'll figure it out." That's when I knew. I wasn't their daughter. I was their ATM. I wasn't family. I was a resource to be used for Sarah's benefit. The 20 years of being overlooked, forgotten, and pushed aside suddenly made perfect sense. I had never been the child they wanted. I was just the one who could pay for the life they wanted to give their real daughter. I hung up that phone and made a decision that changed my life forever. I was done. Done being the forgotten daughter. Done being the emergency fund. Done being Maya the problem solver, while Sarah got to be Sarah the beloved. I hired a lawyer, transferred my portion of the mortgage payments to a separate account, and set up automatic payments so my credit wouldn't be destroyed. Then I changed my phone number, moved to a new apartment, and began the process of building a life where my value wasn't measured by my bank account. For 12 years, I kept those mortgage payments going because my credit was tied to that house. For 12 years, I watched from a distance as Sarah lived in the home I had bought, posted Instagram photos of pool parties I wasn't invited to, and complained on social media about how hard her life was. For 12 years, I built my own architecture firm from the ground up. I designed houses for other people's families, created spaces filled with love and warmth that I'd never experienced myself. I made friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. I dated men who saw my worth beyond my wallet. For 12 years, I thought I had closed that chapter of my life forever. Until that phone call at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The drive to my childhood home took 3 hours, and every mile felt like travelling backward through time. The neighbourhood hadn't changed much, still the same manicured lawns and expensive cars in every driveway. But pulling into the driveway of the house I had bought but never owned felt surreal. Sarah answered the door, and for a moment I barely recognised her. She was 28 now, but she looked like she hadn't aged a day past 22. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her nails were freshly done, and she was wearing clothes that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Oh," she said, looking genuinely surprised. "You actually came." Not, "Hello," not, "I missed you." Just surprised that I had shown up to see our dying father. "Where is he?" I asked, stepping past her into the foyer that I had never been invited to enjoy. "Upstairs. Mom's with him." She paused, looking me up and down. "You look successful." There was something in her tone, not admiration, but assessment, like she was calculating my net worth based on my designer handbag and tailored coat. I found Dad in what used to be the guest bedroom, now converted into a makeshift hospital room. He was sleeping, and the change in him was shocking. The man who had once seemed larger than life was now barely a shadow under white hospital sheets. Cancer had stolen at least 50 pounds from his frame, and his skin had that greyish pallor that comes with serious illness. Mum sat beside him in a chair that looked like it had been there for weeks. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment her face showed genuine relief. "Maya, thank God you're here." She stood up and hugged me, and for just a second I felt like someone's daughter again. But the feeling didn't last long. "We need to talk," she said, glancing toward Dad to make sure he was still sleeping. "Downstairs." The kitchen looked exactly the same as it had 12 years ago, except for the stack of medical bills on the counter that was at least 3 inches thick. Mum sat down across from me at the same table where I used to eat my after-school snacks alone, while Sarah got help with her homework. "The cancer was diagnosed 6 months ago," Mum began. We didn't want to worry anyone until we knew for sure what we were dealing with. 6 months. They had known for 6 months and hadn't told me. If I hadn't answered that phone call, I would have found out about Dad's death through an obituary. The treatment has been expensive, Mum continued. Insurance covers some of it, but there are specialists, experimental treatments, medications that aren't covered. We've already spent through most of our retirement savings. I could see where this was going, but I let her continue. And then there's Sarah. She's been such a help, taking care of your father, managing his medications, driving him to appointments. She had to quit her yoga instructor training program to be here full time. Sarah had been training to be a yoga instructor at 28, after living rent-free in a house I paid for 8 years. Maya, we need your help, not just for your father's medical bills, but Sarah needs support too. She's given up so much to be here for the family. How much are we talking about? I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. Mom pulled out a notebook that was clearly prepared for this conversation. The medical bills remaining are about $150,000. That includes the treatments he needs for the next few months. $150,000 for a man who had never once told me he was proud of me. And for Sarah's expenses, well, she needs a place to live after your father passes, and she'll need time to get back on her feet, maybe finish her yoga certification. We were thinking maybe $3,000 a month for living expenses for at least a year, plus the $15,000 to complete her program. I stared at my mother, this woman who had given birth to me but had never really been my mother, and felt a familiar numbness settle over me. They weren't asking for help with Dad's medical bills, they were asking me to fund Sarah's lifestyle. Again. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You want me to pay Dad's medical bills, which I'm willing to do, but you also want me to pay Sarah's rent, her living expenses, and her yoga certification fees? Maya, she's your sister, and she's been here sacrificing for the family while you've been... Mom gestured vaguely. Living your life. Living my life. Building a successful business. Creating something meaningful with my own 2 hands. Apparently that was selfish. Where has Sarah been living for the past 8 years? I asked. Here, of course, in the house. The house I bought. The house that was still in Sarah's name. The house whose mortgage I was still paying. Mum, I need you to understand something. I will pay every penny of Dad's medical bills. Whatever he needs, however much it costs, I'll take care of it. But I won't pay for Sarah's lifestyle anymore. Mum's face changed instantly. The desperate gratitude disappeared, replaced by the cold disappointment I remembered so well from childhood. Maya, I thought you'd grown up. I thought you'd learned what family means. I learned exactly what family means in this house, I replied, but apparently we have very different definitions. That's when Sarah walked into the kitchen, and I realized she'd been listening from the doorway. So you're really going to let Dad die because you won't help your own family? She said, crossing her arms. The manipulation was so blatant, so perfectly calculated, that for a moment I was impressed by her audacity. I'm going to pay for Dad's treatment, I said calmly. Every cent. But you're 28 years old, Sarah. It's time you started paying your own bills. I've been taking care of Dad, she protested. I gave up my whole life to be here. You gave up yoga instructor training. That's not exactly a career sacrifice. The look that passed between Mum and Sarah told me everything I needed to know. This conversation had been planned. They had calculated exactly how much they could squeeze out of me, and they had expected me to pay without question, just like I had at 20. But I wasn't 20 anymore. I was 32, successful, and I had learned my worth from people who actually valued me. "I need some air," I said, standing up from the table. "I'll be back tomorrow to discuss Dad's medical care. Just his medical care." I walked out of that kitchen, past the living room where I had never been allowed to put my feet up, past the pool I had paid for but never swam in, and out the front door of the house that would never be home. Sitting in my car in the driveway, I called the one person who had always seen clearly through my family's dysfunction, my best friend from college, David Kim. He was a family attorney now, and he had been telling me for years that I needed to legally distance myself from that mortgage. "Maya, how did it go?" "Exactly like you predicted," I said, leaning my head against the steering wheel. "They want money for Dad's treatment, which is fine, but they also want me to bankroll Sarah's extended adolescence." "And you said no?" "I said no to the Sarah part, yes to Dad's medical bills." "Good for you. That's progress." "David, I need you to look into something for me. That mortgage I'm still paying, is there any way to get out of it, or to force the deed to reflect my actual investment?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Maya, I've been waiting 12 years for you to ask me that question. Let me make some calls." The next morning, I arrived at the house to find a full family meeting in progress. Not just Mom and Sarah, but aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in over a decade. They were all sitting around the dining room table like some kind of intervention. "Maya," my Aunt Linda said as I walked in, "we've all been talking, and we think you're being very selfish about this family crisis." "Selfish?" There was that word again. My Uncle Robert nodded gravely. "Your parents raised you, gave you every opportunity. Now it's time to give back. Every opportunity. Like the opportunity to pay for my own education while they spent my college fund on Sarah's private dance lessons. Like the opportunity to work 3 jobs in high school while Sarah got an allowance for being a good student with her C+ average." I looked around the table at these people who had watched me be overlooked and ignored for 20 years, and I realized something profound. They had always known. They had always seen how I was treated, and they had never said a word. Now they wanted to lecture me about family obligations. "I'm paying for Dad's medical treatment," I said clearly. "Every penny, but I'm not funding anyone else's lifestyle." "Sarah isn't asking for a lifestyle," my cousin Jennifer chimed in. "She's asking for basic support while she gets back on her feet." Basic support. $3,000 a month plus program fees for a woman who had been living rent-free for 8 years. That's when my phone rang. David. "Maya, you need to hear this. I've been going through the mortgage documents for your parents' house." "Can this wait? I'm kind of in the middle of something." "No, it can't wait. Maya, that mortgage transfer was never legally completed. Your parents forged your signature on the deed transfer." The room went silent as my face changed. Everyone was staring at me, but I couldn't focus on anything except David's words. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you're the legal owner of that house. You have been for 12 years. Sarah has been living in your house, not hers." I looked around the table at my family, at these people who had spent the morning lecturing me about selfishness and obligation, and I started to laugh. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of laugh that comes when the universe reveals its cosmic sense of irony. "Maya?" Mum's voice sounded very small. "What's wrong?" "David," I said into the phone, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I need you to come to 42 Maple Street, bring all the paperwork, and bring eviction notices." The silence in that dining room was deafening. "Maya," Uncle Robert said slowly, "what's going on?" I hung up the phone and looked at each of them, these people who had enabled 20 years of emotional neglect, and then had the audacity to call me selfish for setting boundaries. "What's going on?" I said, my voice perfectly calm, "is that I just found out I own this house. I've owned it for 12 years, and Sarah has been living in my property without paying rent for 8 years. Mum's face went white. Sarah looked like she was going to throw up. The aunts and uncles suddenly became very interested in their coffee cups. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "Apparently, our parents forged my signature on the deed transfer, which means every month that I've been making mortgage payments, I've been paying for my own house, while my sister lived in it for free." I stood up from the table and looked at Sarah, really looked at her. This woman who had been handed everything in life and still expected more. This woman who had lived in luxury while I rebuilt my life from nothing. "Sarah, you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Mum, I'll pay for Dad's medical care until the end, but I'm done subsidizing this family's dysfunction." "You can't do this," Mum said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can. I should have done it 12 years ago." I walked out of that dining room, past the family members who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes, and up the stairs to see my father. He was awake, and from the look in his eyes, I could tell he had heard everything. "Maya," he said weakly, "I'm sorry." For a moment, I thought he was apologizing for everything, for 20 years of neglect, for choosing Sarah over me every single time, for allowing me to be used as the family ATM. But then he continued, "I'm sorry we're putting you in this position. Sarah needs—" "No, Dad," I interrupted. "Sarah is a grown woman. She needs to take care of herself. But she's not strong like you." And there it was, the excuse that had defined my entire childhood. Maya is strong, so Maya doesn't need love, attention, or support. Maya can handle anything, so let's focus on Sarah. Strength isn't something you're born with, Dad. It's something you develop when no one else is there to catch you when you fall. I kissed his forehead, maybe the last time I'd ever do that, and walked out of the room. David arrived an hour later with a briefcase full of documents and the kind of satisfied expression that lawyers get when they're about to deliver justice. The family meeting had disbanded, but Mom and Sarah were waiting in the living room like prisoners awaiting sentencing. "Mrs. Chen, Sarah," David said formally, "I need to discuss the legal status of this property." For the next hour, he laid out the case with surgical precision. The forged signatures, the illegal transfer, the fact that Maya had been the legitimate owner all along. He explained eviction procedures, property rights, and the fact that Sarah had been essentially squatting in Maya's house for 8 years. "However," David continued, "Maya is willing to be reasonable. Sarah, you have 30 days to find alternative housing. Mrs. Chen, since you're the primary caregiver for your husband during his illness, you can remain in the house until after his passing, at which point we'll need to discuss your housing situation." "This is insane," Sarah said, finally finding her voice. "You can't just kick me out of my home." "It's not your home," David replied calmly. "It never was. Mum, tell them." Sarah looked desperately at our mother, but Mum couldn't meet anyone's eyes. She knew exactly what they had done 12 years ago, and she knew they had been caught. "What about the yoga certification?" Sarah asked, grasping at straws. "What about my living expenses?" I looked at this woman, my sister, who was 28 years old and still expecting someone else to pay her bills, who had lived in luxury for 8 years while I rebuilt my life from scratch, who had never once asked how I was doing or whether I needed anything. "Sarah," I said gently, "what about them? You can't just cut me off with nothing." "I'm not cutting you off with nothing. You've had 8 years of free housing, free utilities, and parents who never expected you to contribute. Most people don't get that kind of head start in life. But I'm not ready. And there it was, the truth we had all been dancing around. Sarah wasn't ready because she had never been required to be ready. She was 28 years old and as helpless as a child because my parents had convinced themselves that protecting her from responsibility was the same thing as loving her. Then I guess it's time to get ready, I said. 3 days later, I hired the best oncologist in the state to take over Dad's care. I set up a medical account with enough money to cover every treatment, every medication, every comfort measure he might need. I arranged for professional home care so that Mum wouldn't have to handle his physical needs alone. What I didn't do was give Sarah a penny. David found her a nice one-bedroom apartment 15 minutes away and paid the first month's rent and security deposit, not as a gift, but as a loan that would be deducted from any inheritance she might receive. I had him draft a formal rental agreement for that too, because I was done with handshake deals and family promises. The night before Sarah was supposed to move out, she came to my hotel room. I was staying at a Marriott rather than in the house I owned, because I needed space to process everything that had happened. "Maya," she said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" She looked different, smaller somehow. The entitled confidence was gone, replaced by something that might have been actual vulnerability. "Come in," I said. We sat in the hotel room's small sitting area, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "I'm scared," she admitted. It was the first honest thing she had said to me in 12 years. "I know," I replied. "I don't know how to live on my own. I don't know how to pay bills or manage money or be an adult." "I know that too. Will you help me?" The question hung in the air between us. This was the moment, the choice that would define our relationship going forward. I could say yes and fall back into the old pattern of fixing Sarah's problems. I could say no and maintain the boundaries I had fought so hard to establish. "I'll help you learn," I said finally. "But I won't do it for you." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I never realized how much you sacrificed for us." "I don't think anyone did, including me." "Maya, I'm sorry for all of it, for the house, for the money, for never appreciating what you did. It was the apology I had waited 12 years to hear. But strangely, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I had built a life without their approval, without their love, without their recognition. Their opinion of me, good or bad, no longer defined my worth. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "But Sarah, the most important thing you can do now is learn to apologize to yourself." "What do you mean?" "You're 28 years old and you've never been allowed to fail, to struggle, or to succeed on your own. Mom and Dad didn't just do a disservice to me, they did one to you too. They robbed you of the chance to discover your own strength." Sarah looked confused, like she had never considered that being protected from consequences might actually be a form of harm. "I don't know who I am," she whispered. "Then figure it out. You have the rest of your life to become the person you're supposed to be, but you have to do it yourself." We talked for another hour, really talked, maybe for the first time in our lives. She told me about feeling lost and purposeless, about how she had never been expected to make decisions or face challenges. I told her about the loneliness of always being the responsible one, the burden of feeling like love was conditional on usefulness. When she left that night, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not hope that we would magically become close, but hope that Sarah might finally have the chance to grow into her own person. The next morning, I stood in the driveway and watched the moving truck load up Sarah's belongings. She had more stuff than I owned after 12 years of building my own life. But that wasn't surprising. When you've never had to worry about money, you accumulate things instead of experiences. Mum watched from the window, and I could see the resentment in her posture. In her mind, I was still the villain, the ungrateful daughter who had torn the family apart instead of quietly continuing to pay for everyone else's comfort. But I wasn't 20 years old anymore. I knew the difference between family and obligation, between love and manipulation, between helping and enabling. David finished supervising the move and walked over to where I was standing. "How do you feel?" he asked. I considered the question. How did I feel about reclaiming a house I had bought but never lived in, about finally setting boundaries with people who had used me for over a decade, about watching my sister face consequences for the first time in her life? "Free," I said finally. "I feel free." 3 weeks passed in an uneasy calm. Dad's condition stabilized with the new treatment plan I had arranged, and Sarah had moved into her apartment without the dramatic meltdown everyone expected. Mum had stopped calling me every day to guilt-trip me about abandoning the family, though I could feel her disapproval radiating through the house whenever I visited Dad. I thought we had reached some kind of equilibrium. I was wrong. The family meeting that changed everything happened on a Sunday afternoon in October. I arrived at the house for my weekly visit with Dad to find cars lining the street, my aunt's Honda, my uncle's pickup truck, and several others I didn't recognize. Through the front windows, I could see people gathered in the living room. An intervention, again. I sat in my car for a moment, debating whether to just drive away. But Dad was inside, and despite everything, I wasn't going to let family politics prevent me from seeing him during what might be his final months. The conversation stopped when I walked through the front door. 12 people were crammed into the living room. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and a few family friends I vaguely remembered from childhood barbecues. They all turned to look at me with expressions ranging from disapproval to pity. "Maya," Aunt Linda said, standing up like she was chairing a board meeting, "we're so glad you're here. We've been discussing the family situation." "Have you?" I said, not bothering to hide my irritation. "And what conclusions has the committee reached?" Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Maya, we understand you're upset about the house situation, but kicking Sarah out during a family crisis is just cruel. She's struggling to adjust, and your father is dying." My cousin Jennifer nodded emphatically. "Sarah came to my house crying yesterday. She doesn't know how to live on her own. She's never had to pay bills or manage money." "She's 28, I said flatly. "But she's been taking care of your parents," added Mrs. Peterson from next door, who apparently had been elevated to family spokesperson. "She gave up her whole life to be here." I looked around the room at these people, most of whom I hadn't seen in years, some of whom had never bothered to call when I was struggling to build my life from nothing. Now they were all experts on family responsibility. "Let me ask you something," I said to the room. "Where were all of you 12 years ago when I was 20 years old, working 3 jobs, and my parents took my life savings to buy a house they put in Sarah's name?" Uncomfortable silence. "Where were you when I was eating ramen noodles for dinner so I could make the mortgage payments on a house I wasn't allowed to live in?" More silence. "Where were you when I graduated college with honours and no one from my family showed up because Sarah had a dance recital the same day?" Aunt Linda shifted in her seat. "Maya, that's all in the past. We're talking about now." "No, you're talking about money. You're all here because Sarah called crying about having to pay her own rent for the first time in her life, and you've decided that makes me the villain." That's when Mom spoke up from her chair in the corner. "Maya, I raised you to be better than this. I raised you to put family first." The words hit me like a slap. I stared at this woman who had given birth to me but had never really mothered me, and something inside me finally broke, not with sadness, but with clarity. "You didn't raise me to put family first, Mom. You raised me to put Sarah first. There's a difference." "That's not true." "Isn't it? When I was 8 and Sarah was 5, who made their own breakfast when you were tired? When I was 16 and wanted to try out for the school play, who was told she couldn't because someone needed to watch Sarah during rehearsals? When I was applying for colleges, who filled out their own applications because you were too busy with Sarah's dance competitions?" Each question landed like a bomb in the quiet room. I could see recognition flickering in some faces, memories they had chosen to forget or ignore. "Maya," Uncle Robert said carefully, "you're obviously carrying a lot of resentment." "I'm not carrying resentment," I interrupted. "I'm stating facts. For 20 years, my role in this family was to be the invisible support system for everyone else's dreams. I was the emergency fund, the problem solver, the one who could be counted on to sacrifice so others could shine." I looked directly at Mom. "You want to know what you raised me to be? You raised me to be strong enough to survive without you, and I have." That's when Sarah walked through the front door. She looked different than she had 3 weeks ago, thinner maybe, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and a simple sweater, probably the most affordable outfit she owned. "Maya," she said, and her voice was small and tired. "I didn't know you were here." "I come every Sunday to see Dad," I replied evenly. "I know, I've been avoiding Sundays." The room was watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match. I could feel everyone waiting for the dramatic confrontation they had probably been anticipating. "Sarah," Aunt Linda said gently, "tell Maya how you've been struggling. Tell her what it's been like." Sarah looked around the room at all these people who had assembled to fight her battles for her, and something shifted in her expression. For a moment, she looked almost embarrassed. "No," she said quietly. "Sweetie, it's okay," Mom encouraged. "Tell Maya about the bills, about how hard it's been to manage everything." "I said no." Sarah's voice was firmer this time. She looked at me with something I'd never seen before, what might have been respect. "Maya, can we talk? Alone?" "Sarah," Uncle Robert protested, "we're all here to help." "I don't need help," Sarah said, and for the first time in her life she sounded like an adult. "This is between me and my sister." We walked out to the backyard, leaving behind a room full of people who suddenly had nothing to do. The October air was crisp, and the pool I had paid for was covered for the winter. Sarah sat down on one of the patio chairs and gestured for me to join her. "They called this meeting without asking me," she said without preamble. "I figured. I didn't ask them to come here and gang up on you." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or deception, but she seemed genuine. "Okay. Maya, I need to tell you something. The first week in my apartment was hell. I didn't know how to set up utilities, or how to buy groceries efficiently, or how to budget. I called Mom crying every night." "I can imagine." "But then something happened. On day 8, I figured out how to make dinner with what I had in my fridge instead of ordering takeout. It was just scrambled eggs and toast, but I made it myself, with my own groceries, in my own kitchen." She paused, staring at the covered pool. "It was the first meal I'd ever made for myself that no one else paid for or planned or supervised, and it tasted like freedom. I felt something unexpected, a small spark of pride for this woman who was finally, at 28, taking her first real steps toward independence. The truth is, Sarah continued, I'm scared every day, but I'm also discovering things about myself I never knew, like I'm actually good at organizing things when I have to be. And I'm not as helpless as everyone always told me I was. Sarah, let me finish. I called this family meeting because I was scared and overwhelmed, and I wanted them to convince you to take care of me again. But sitting in there, listening to them talk about me like I'm some kind of child who can't survive without constant help, it made me realize something. She turned to look at me directly. They're not trying to help me. They're trying to keep me dependent. And you're not being cruel by refusing to enable that. You're giving me the chance to find out who I really am. Before I could respond, my phone rang. David. Maya, I need you and your family to hear something important. Are you all together? Define all, I said, glancing toward the house where the intervention was presumably still in session. I mean everyone who's been pressuring you about Sarah's situation. Can you put me on speaker? I looked at Sarah, who nodded. We walked back inside to find the family meeting had devolved into worried whispers about what Sarah and I were discussing outside. Everyone, I said loudly enough to cut through the chatter. I have my lawyer on the phone and he has something to say. The room went silent. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the coffee table. Good afternoon, everyone. David's voice came through clearly. I'm David Kim, Maya's attorney. I've been investigating the financial and legal situation surrounding this family, and I need to share some information that affects all of you. Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably. Now see here, we don't need lawyers involved in family matters. Actually, you do, David interrupted smoothly. Because this family has been operating under several false assumptions about Maya's legal and financial obligations. Mum's face had gone pale. What do you mean? I mean that many of you have been pressuring Maya to financially support her sister based on the belief that she has some kind of moral or legal obligation to do so. You've been treating her like she's selfish for setting boundaries with her money and property. Aunt Linda bristled. She is being selfish. Family takes care of family. Let me ask you something, Mrs. Anderson, David said, and I could hear the edge in his voice. How much have you contributed to Sarah's living expenses over the past 8 years? Well, that's different. Maya has more money. How much? David pressed. Silence. What about you, Mr. Chen? David addressed my uncle. You've been very vocal about family obligations. How much have you personally contributed to your brother's medical bills? More silence. Here's what I've discovered, David continued relentlessly. For 12 years, Maya has been making mortgage payments on a house she legally owns while Sarah lived there rent-free. That's approximately $96,000 in free housing that Maya provided. I watched the math register on faces around the room. Maya has also set up a medical account for her father's care with enough funds to cover all his treatments through the end of his life. That's approximately $150,000. Cousin Jennifer's mouth was hanging open. So when you accuse Maya of being selfish or abandoning her family, what you're really saying is that $250,000 in financial support over 12 years isn't enough. You're saying she should continue indefinitely funding her sister's lifestyle while the rest of you contribute nothing but criticism. The silence in that room was deafening. Furthermore, David continued, several of you have made statements suggesting that Maya owes her family financial support because they raised her and gave her opportunities. Let me be clear. Parents don't loan their children the gift of existence. Raising a child is a legal and moral obligation that doesn't create debt. Uncle Robert tried to interrupt. That's not what we meant. Let me finish. What did create debt in this family was Maya's parents taking her money under false pretenses and forging her signature on legal documents. What created obligation was Maya co-signing a mortgage that protected her credit. Everything Maya has done financially for this family has been voluntary generosity, not obligation. Mum was crying now, but I felt nothing but emptiness where sympathy used to be. The final thing you all need to understand, David said, his voice becoming gentler but no less firm, is that Maya doesn't need your approval to set boundaries. She doesn't need your permission to stop funding her sister's life. And she certainly doesn't need to justify her financial decisions to people who have contributed nothing to the situation but judgment. He paused, letting that sink in. Maya is 32 years old. She's built a successful business from nothing. She's handled her family's financial crises with more grace and generosity than most people would show. And instead of gratitude, she's received criticism and manipulation. I looked around the room at these people who had spent the afternoon lecturing me about selfishness, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Shame. Not all of them, but enough to matter. Now, David concluded, if anyone in this room would like to contribute to Sarah's transition to independence or to the family's medical expenses, I'd be happy to help you set up your own payment plans. Otherwise, I suggest you stop pressuring Maya to solve problems the rest of you aren't willing to address. After David hung up, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, people began to leave. Aunt Linda muttered something about getting lawyers involved, being unnecessary. Uncle Robert avoided eye contact as he shuffled toward the door. Cousin Jennifer whispered an apology that sounded more like an excuse. Within 20 minutes, only Mom, Sarah, and I remained in the living room. Maya, Mom said finally, her voice thick with tears, I never meant for things to turn out this way. What way did you mean for them to turn out? I asked. I thought you'd always be there. I thought family meant we could count on each other. Family does mean you can count on each other, Mom, but that has to go both ways. For 20 years, you could count on me for everything, while I couldn't count on you for anything. That's not true. When did you last ask me how I was doing? When did you last call to see if I needed help with anything? When did you last celebrate one of my achievements or support one of my decisions? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that had been 12 years in the making. I called you when your father got sick, she said weakly. You called me when you needed money, I corrected. There's a difference. Sarah had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. Mom, Maya's right. Mom turned to look at her, clearly surprised to hear Sarah taking my side. She's right about all of it, Sarah continued. We used her. We treated her like she existed to solve our problems and pay our bills. And we never, not once, asked what she needed from us. Sarah, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Sarah interrupted. I understand that I'm 28 years old, and I've been living like a teenager because everyone told me that was okay. I understand that Maya sacrificed her relationship with her family so I could have an easy life. And I understand that I've wasted 12 years I could have spent becoming an actual adult. She stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. Maya, I can't undo 12 years of being selfish and entitled, but I can stop being those things now. Sarah, I don't want your money, she said firmly. I don't want you to pay for my yoga certification or my rent or my groceries. I want to figure out how to do those things myself. I stared at this woman who looked like my sister, but was speaking like a stranger, a stronger, more self-aware stranger than I'd ever known her to be. What I do want, Sarah continued, is the chance to earn your respect. Not as someone you're obligated to help, but as someone who can stand on her own. For the first time in my life, I looked at Sarah and saw potential instead of burden. And Mom, Sarah turned to address our mother, I want you to stop making excuses for me. Stop telling people I'm fragile or helpless. Stop acting like I need to be protected from life. I'm an adult, and it's time I started acting like one. Mum looked back and forth between us like she was watching her world reorganize itself in real time. I don't know how to do that, she admitted. Then learn, Sarah said simply. The same way I'm learning how to take care of myself. I spent the next hour upstairs with Dad while Mom and Sarah talked in the kitchen. His cancer had progressed despite the treatments, and we both knew our time was limited. But for the first time in our relationship, we talked honestly. I'm proud of you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For what? For being strong enough to save yourself. For not letting us destroy you the way we destroyed ourselves. I held his hand and felt the weight of 32 years of complicated emotions. I love you, Dad. I always have. I know, and I'm sorry it took me this long to tell you that I love you too. Not for what you could do for us, but for who you are. It wasn't enough to heal all the wounds of my childhood, but it was something. It was a beginning. When I came downstairs, I found Sarah washing dishes in the kitchen sink, something I'd never seen her do in her entire life. Mum went to lie down, she said, without turning around. I think we overwhelmed her a little. How are you really doing? I asked, and I want an honest answer, not a performance. Sarah turned off the water and dried her hands before turning to face me. I'm scared every day. I wake up in my apartment and sometimes I panic because I don't know if I'm doing anything right. But then I figure something out, like how to unclog a drain or how to make a budget, and I feel proud of myself in a way I never have before. That's good. Is it weird that I'm grateful you kicked me out? I considered the question. Maybe a little weird, but not wrong. Maya, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think we can ever be real sisters? Not the kind who are stuck together because of genetics, but the kind who actually choose to be in each other's lives? It was the question I'd been avoiding since this whole situation started. Could I forgive 12 years of being used and overlooked? Could I trust that Sarah's transformation was real and permanent? Could I separate the adult she was becoming from the entitled child she had been? I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm willing to find out. 6 months later, Dad passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in March. Sarah and I were both there, holding his hands as he took his last breath. Mum had accepted that her role was to comfort him, not to manage his medical care or make decisions about his treatment. She had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, to let me handle the practical aspects of his final months. The funeral was small and dignified. I paid for everything, not as an obligation, but as a choice. Sarah helped with the arrangements, handling details like flowers and programs without being asked. She had gotten a job at a local non-profit and was taking evening classes in business administration. Her apartment was small but clean, decorated with furniture she had bought piece by piece with her own paychecks. At the reception after the service, Aunt Linda approached me with what I recognized as a rehearsed apology. Maya, I owe you an apology for that day at the house. I realize now that we put unfair pressure on you. Thank you for saying that, I replied, but I didn't feel the surge of vindication I'd expected. The opinions of people who had never bothered to understand my situation simply didn't matter anymore. Later, as we were cleaning up, Sarah and I found ourselves alone in the church fellowship hall. "What happens now?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "With us, with the family, with everything." I thought about it. Dad was gone, but his death hadn't magically repaired our relationship or erased the patterns that had shaped our family for decades. Mom was learning to see Sarah as an adult, but it was a slow process. Sarah was discovering her own strength, but she still had years of growth ahead of her. "I think we figure it out as we go," I said finally. "Will you keep making the mortgage payments on the house?" It was a practical question, but I heard the deeper concern underneath it. Sarah wasn't asking about money. She was asking whether I planned to use my financial leverage to control Mom's living situation. "For now," I said. "Mom can stay there as long as she needs to. But when she's ready to downsize or move somewhere else, we'll sell it and split the proceeds." "Split them?" "It's still legally my house, but it was always meant to be the family home. When it's sold, you and Mom will each get a third of the equity." Sarah stared at me. "Maya, that's incredibly generous." "It's fair," I corrected. "There's a difference." 3 months later, I was in my office reviewing plans for a new residential development when Sarah called. "Maya, I have something to tell you, and I want you to hear it from me first." My stomach clenched. "Okay. I'm getting married." Of all the things I'd expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. "You're what?" "His name is Michael. He's a teacher at the school where I work. We've been dating for 4 months. 4 months? And you're getting married?" I know it sounds crazy, but Maya, he's nothing like the guys I used to date. He doesn't care that I don't have money or that I live in a tiny apartment. He likes that I'm independent and that I work hard. I could hear the happiness in her voice, but also something else, uncertainty, like she was waiting for my approval. "Sarah, what I think doesn't matter. What matters is what you think." "I think I love him, and I think he loves me for who I really am, not for who our parents wanted me to be." "Then congratulations." "Will you come to the wedding? It's going to be small, just close family and friends." "And Maya, will you be my maid of honor?" The request caught me completely off guard. 12 months ago, we had been strangers connected only by genetics and resentment. Now she was asking me to stand beside her on the most important day of her life. "Are you sure you want me?" I asked. "You're the only person I want," she said simply. "You're the only person who's ever believed I could be better than I was." I thought about that for a moment. Had I believed she could be better? Or had I simply refused to enable her to stay the same? "I'd be honoured," I said finally. The wedding was in Mom's backyard on a perfect Saturday in June. Sarah had planned everything herself, staying within a budget she'd saved from her non-profit salary. She looked radiant in a simple dress she'd bought off the rack, and Michael looked at her like she was the most amazing woman in the world. I stood beside her as she promised to love and support him through good times and bad, and I realized that this was the first promise I'd ever heard Sarah make that wasn't really about what someone else would do for her. During the reception, Mom pulled me aside. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For what specifically?" I asked, because there were so many options. "For all of it. For treating you like you were stronger than you were. For expecting you to carry burdens that weren't yours to carry. For not seeing that Sarah needed to struggle in order to grow." I looked at this woman who had given birth to me, but had never really known me, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Forgiveness. Not the dramatic, movie scene kind of forgiveness that erases all hurt, but the quiet, practical kind that lets you move forward without carrying the weight of the past. Thank you for saying that, Mom. Do you think we can start over? I considered the question. I don't think we can start over, but maybe we can start differently. A year later, I was driving through my old neighbourhood when I decided to stop by the house on Maple Street. I still owned it, though Mum had been talking about moving to a smaller place closer to Sarah and Michael. I found Mom in the garden, planting bulbs for next spring. She looked up when she heard my car in the driveway. "Maya, what a nice surprise." "I was in the neighbourhood," I said, which was only partly true. "How are you doing?" "Good, better. Sarah and Michael came for dinner last night. Did you know she's taking a cooking class?" I sat down on the porch steps and watched Mom work. The garden looked better than it had in years. She had more time to care for it now that she wasn't managing Sarah's life. "Mum, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you regret how you raised us?" She stopped digging and sat back on her heels. "I regret a lot of things. I regret not seeing that you needed protection and nurturing just as much as Sarah did. I regret not teaching Sarah to be independent sooner. I regret not being proud of you out loud when you achieved amazing things. Why didn't you? Honestly, I think I was scared that if I didn't protect Sarah from everything, she'd never survive. And I thought you were so capable that you didn't need protection from anything. Everyone needs protection sometimes. I know that now, but when you're in the middle of raising children, it's hard to see clearly. You make decisions based on fear instead of wisdom." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, and I realized that this was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. "Maya," Mom said eventually, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you, not just for your success, but for your character. You could have walked away from all of us and never looked back, and you would have been justified. Instead, you found a way to save Dad, help Sarah grow up, and still protect yourself. That takes wisdom I'm not sure I would have had at your age." Thank you for saying that. I should have said it years ago. 6 months after that conversation, I sold the house on Maple Street. Mum had decided to move to a retirement community near Sarah and Michael, who were expecting their first child. Sarah was nervous about becoming a mother, but she was approaching it with the same determination she'd brought to learning independence. When the house sold, I split the proceeds 3 ways as I'd promised. Mum used her share as a down payment on her new place. Sarah and Michael put theirs toward buying their first home. I used my share to start a scholarship fund for first-generation college students who were working multiple jobs to pay for school. I called it the Maya Chen Foundation for Self-Reliant Learners. The fund's mission statement read, "For students who understand that strength isn't something you're born with, it's something you develop when no one else is there to catch you when you fall." Today, 5 years after Dad's death, I have a relationship with my mother and sister that's based on choice rather than obligation. We see each other on holidays and special occasions, not because family law requires it, but because we want to. We talk about our lives, our goals, our challenges, and we listen to each other's answers. Sarah is a mother of 2 now, and she's raising her children with the kind of balance Mom never achieved. She loves them fiercely but expects them to be capable. She protects them from real dangers but lets them face age-appropriate challenges. She's become the kind of parent I hope to be someday. Mom is thriving in her retirement community, where she volunteers at a literacy program and has made friends who know her as herself, not as Sarah's mother or Maya's mother. She calls me once a week to check in, and sometimes she even asks for advice. I'm 37 now, and I've built a life that feels authentically mine. My architecture firm is successful, my relationships are healthy, and I wake up every morning knowing that my worth isn't measured by my usefulness to others. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the 12 years of estrangement from my family, and I always give them the same answer. I don't regret the separation because it gave me the space to become who I was meant to be. And I don't regret the reconciliation because it happened on my terms, with boundaries intact and expectations clear. The truth is, you can't love people well until you love yourself well. You can't have healthy relationships until you know the difference between helping and enabling, between generosity and exploitation, between family obligation and family choice. For 20 years, I thought love meant sacrifice without boundaries. I thought being strong meant accepting whatever treatment others gave me. I thought family meant enduring dysfunction in the name of loyalty. I was wrong about all of that. Real love requires boundaries. Real strength means knowing when to walk away. Real family means choosing each other every day, not being trapped together by genetics and guilt. My family lost me for 12 years because they treated me like a resource instead of a person. They got me back when they learned to treat me like both. The difference between those two things changed all of our lives. Have you ever felt like you weren't really part of your own family? Like your value was measured only by what you could provide rather than who you were? Leave me a comment below and share your story. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can do for others. And remember, walking away from people who take advantage of your kindness isn't cruelty. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do, for them and for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe for more stories about finding strength, setting boundaries, and choosing yourself when no one else will.